We have no true reason to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow morning. Or at least that's what David Hume has to say. And the question is, how can we take this seriously? Should we take it seriously? After all, Hume is a well-regarded philosopher. Is this a part of what makes him well-regarded? Philosophers do sometimes get a little silly, but this is indeed one of Hume's most celebrated positions, and it's what sort of etched him into history. Specifically, it would be his radical empiricism and the problem of induction. Induction. Because Hume was a radical empiricist, it led him down this path of believing that there's no reason to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow morning, or that your sandwich won't turn into an Xbox 360 on your next bite. Essentially, Hume is coming after the whole of inductive reasoning, or also the scientific method / process. Did I really just say slash out loud? Keep in mind, Hume was a part of the Enlightenment. He was an Enlightenment thinker, one of the most well-known ones. So this isn't some sort of 1960s byproduct of 500 micrograms of lysergic acid dithylamide straight to the dome. Instead, he came to this conclusion by walking through the uniformity principle, as he would call it. But I mean, who really knows what the Enlightenment thinkers were up to? I mean, after all, they did have to drink beer to stay hydrated, so, this could come out of some pretty hazy thoughts. All I'm trying to get at, though, is that when Hume puts the problem of induction through the uniformity principle lens, it becomes pretty tricky to argue against. To start then, what really is the uniformity principle? It's pretty simple. Upon observation, the future has always been like the past. And so you might be asking yourself, wow, Kev, doesn't that sort of just defeat everything you've just said? And to that, I, and also David Hume, have to ask, what justifies our belief that the future will continue to look like the past? Vsauce music. Enter the Humean circle. Forget the Cartesian circle. This circle is the one that's really existentially haunting and really leaves us with really just guesses or stabs at reasoning as a whole and really life. Hume argues that when people think that 1, the future will be like the past because 2, the future has always been like the past, it places them in a vicious cycle of circular reasoning. This is because 2 is the only evidence for 1, and 2 is not good enough evidence for 1 unless there's good enough reason to accept it, which logically does not follow. So essentially, when we say that the sun will rise tomorrow, we're saying it because the future has always been like the past, and we think that it will continue to be like the past because it has always looked like the past, and you see how we can just go on and on and on. And there you have the Humean circle, which audibly is pretty ironic, and I'll get to that in just a bit. From here, Hume concludes this aforementioned, sort of mind-shattering, earth-shattering, mind-blowing, mind-numbing, mind-blowing, mind-numbing, mind-blowing, mind-numbing idea that we have no real reason to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow morning. But he does indeed go further than that. Hume tells us that the only reason we think this way is because we're human beings. Sort of, how could a anteater have the concept of the sun rising tomorrow and us going through the seasons and all of the celestial sort of academic thought, you know what I mean? An anteater can't really comprehend that, and that makes sense. In other words, these processes are sort of a byproduct of this organic programming that we possess. And he really posits psychological conditioning as the reason for this. He thinks that this is what the human mind does. It's sort of how it keeps everything straight and makes life be able to be practically lived. There's a dog barking outside. Do I have reason to think that it'll keep barking? We see the sun rise time and time again, and so eventually we believe that it'll keep rising every morning, going down every night, etc. And just as a little side note here, Hume brought this up way before Pavlov's, famed dog and bell experiment where he rang the bells and eventually trained the dogs to eat on command pretty much, showcasing conditioning. And this is why philosophy is the best, because philosophers are ahead of the game. For Hume, all knowledge is a posteriori.
A posteriori.
Meaning it comes from experience and that nothing is innately known. From here, Hume goes kind of even more bonkers, claiming that causality itself isn't even real. So when you clicked on this video, you yourself did not cause it to play. At least that's what Hume would say. You can see how he would get to this point through his navigation of the uniformity principle, but to try and, make this video not boring, I'm not going to get into the technicality of that. And so with that being said, if you've somehow managed to fall asleep throughout my, explaining the problem of induction, then it's time to wake up! Not just us, but even David Hume would say that it's impractical to live in this way. We can't dwell in such uncertainty. I mean, imagine with every single step you took that you had to, you're pretty much taking a risk with your life that you wouldn't fall into the void, because, Hume's arguments do allow for that to be a possibility, but we cannot live that way, quite obviously. And this is indeed the message that I'd like to shoot off into the internet void. So I've hoped that you have stayed with me here. While there are plenty of sort of valid, I won't say sound because I'm not qualified to do so, while there's plenty of valid critiques against Hume here, the point is Hume has blown open or away our sense of rationality and really our concept of reality at large and on the whole. He's done it in such a way that I think that if anyone has heard this for the first time, their mind would be blown. This made me hate Hume for quite a while, as he made me pretty uncomfortable, I wanted to stay within the boundaries of normality and comfortability, but I've slowly grown to appreciate what Hume's had to say with the problem of induction and causality. It really makes life much more absurd, and if you didn't already know, I love absurdity. We truly don't know much about this whole life or existence thing. We don't know much about what we're doing here, what the purpose of life is, and so on. And so, instead of taking the nihilistic approach, I must ask, isn't this good enough reason to sort of slow down, stop being hard on yourself, and just enjoy the ride? It's not a message of inaction either. Rather, I think it's sort of being kind to yourself. After all, we're only aware of our own existence, our own continuation throughout time. Although David Hume would of course object to that, but frick Hume. It feels as if while we run this marathon that is life, we have this sort of crowd cheering us on, whether it be people, systems, sort of aspirations, or even ourselves. We get caught up in believing that there's one direction, one destination to the whole thing. And it's cyclical too. We really run many of these races, and sometimes we run multiple simultaneously, when all the while, to quote John Lennon, everything's wide open, man. The world's wide open, man. Anything can happen, man. So I have to say thanks to David Hume for indirectly making us realize that we have to slow down and enjoy this beautiful experience. Peace and love.